Hello, my name is Haider Ali. I'm a PhD design candidate at Lancaster and in the UK. And in this video presentation, I'm going to be introducing the Tarot of Things, an artifact that was created as part of my PhD with the Petrus project at Lancaster. A little bit about Petrus first, for those who don't know. Petrus is a collaborative research cohort of different universities in the UK. I believe there are 12. We're exploring wide areas of IoT along different tracks, including ethics and technical advancements, effects on policy, etc. My association is with the adoption track of the project, where we are exploring what factors affect the adoption of IoT in domestic and industrial settings. So what is the Tarot of Things? Well, in one sentence, it is a philosophically charged artifact designed as a glimpse into an alternative perspective for the design of IoT. Now that is a mouthful, so I'm going to try and make a little bit more sense of it for you, so bear with me. It's actually meant to be a playful take on the idea of what a design alternative could be for IoT, mainly because of my own interest that's in ludic design practices. I've tried to keep this agenda of curiosity and play in mind as I worked on this, and the artifact thus became a way to explore what a playful way of exploring what an object-oriented perspective could be over the more standard anthropocentric perspective in design. So there's a lot of dense philosophy here, and sadly I'll have to skim over a lot of it, but I'll try and keep the main bits in there. And I'll try to make it as condensed and as clear as possible. So the little background first of where this project finds its roots. It's in this idea of more than human design as an alternative for human-centered design that's been generating a lot of traction here at Lancaster. And this is not to say that HCD in any way is flawed. There are a lot of benefits to using HCD. All design, in fact, can be considered, I suppose, in some way anthropocentric, since the focus is on a user, which is generally human. But when considering the design of IoT, HCD has a tendency to hide away the complex underlying workings of IoT, because of its incessant need for simplicity. Now, this is a good thing, and there's also a bad thing in this regard. Because it ironically alienates the technology further by allowing blind spots where security and ethical hazards can appear, and keeping the human user out of the loop, so to say. It's something that's been seen over time as well, with so many IoT-enabled quote-unquote smart devices being released that don't live up to the promise of what a connected smart future or smart world would be like. I mean, you can buy an egg tray that you can put in the fridge, and it keeps track of your eggs on your mobile phone. Whether that's important information or enough information or data to warrant a device on its own is one question, but entire business models are designed around the fallacy of a smart object. And my colleague Joe, he actually calls this the snake oil of the internet. So the reason for taking on this more than human perspective is actually is because of the way IoT devices interact. It's not a direct relationship; it's an indirect relationship. For the user, it might seem like one. You just pick up your phone and you tap a screen, or you flip a switch and something happens. But underneath, there's a chain of interaction happening that for an IoT device to time to life, it requires a series of checklists. It requires a series of gateways to go through and interact with different entities whose relationships are independent yet interdependent upon each other before it can actually do something. So to visualize this, we earlier on in the project, we adopted the metaphor of the constellation as a way to give an altering perspective view of IoT. And this all depended on the different clusters of services and users and entities that were working together. As an example, a user's relationship with a smart meter would be very different to the energy provider's relationship to that meter. These constellations make unique spaces of interaction between objects, or tiny ontologies, taking a term from philosophy. And it's a common term that's been used in object-oriented philosophy to understand the nature of very intimate sort of relations between objects. Now, the word object actually gets thrown around a lot in this research, around more than human design, because it stems from a phenomenological discourse and object-oriented philosophy. One of our earliest approaches to understanding the more than human perspective was to create a model for what a philosophical lens of IoT could be like. And now philosophy, and particularly object-oriented philosophy, has this tendency to present an exploded view of things. I'm not going to go into the specifics of this model right now, but short version is that by using this lens, it was possible to open up IoT interactions and help situate them better as philosophical phenomena. If you're interested in this, in how this model works, we've written an entire paper on this, and all of our artifacts so far have been using this model in some manner, in some way, referencing it. And I guess this all comes down to what Graham Harman's view of object-oriented ontology actually is, since it defines no precedence of humans over non-humans. So anything can be viewed as an object: a smartphone, a mug, Venus, Lancaster, climate change, etc. They all reside on an equal plane where they can be dissected for knowledge and they can be probed. And this is the bedrock upon which all this entire more than human perspective is designed around. So by combining philosophy with design, it sort of brought about ways to explore agency within IoT objects for what a post-anthropocentric perspective in design could be like. This, of course, helped the philosophical discourse, but also presented novel opportunities for design, as I'll later go into. So how we approached this was through philosophical carpentry. It's a concept that was propagated by Ian Bogost as a way to do philosophy or enact philosophical arguments. Bogost has concerns with the practice of writing in philosophy, where academics, he believes aren't good writers who rely on jargon a lot, and so his preferred approach is to make artifacts that do the philosophy for you in a way, sort of do half of the work, and then you can supplement it with writing. Essentially, what he's proposing is a practice of ontography, or describing the nature of things. Specifically these tiny ontologies that appear in object-oriented philosophy, such as the ones in the constellations of IoT. An example he gives of a carpentered artifact is the Tableau machine, and I absolutely love this actually. It's a study of creating a sentient home aware of its occupants. The algorithm involved renders digital artwork as representation of the human activities within the space, taking the data collected in that space and then just churning out this artwork. It's like an AI's depiction of what humans do, around them. Interestingly, the predecessor to the Tower of Things was a board game called the Internet of Things board game. Not the best name. We weren't going for anything flashy. The game actually allowed players to experience a disillusionment of IoT, a concept that's very prevalent in my research, where we see IoT in a specific way with certain anticipations. And it revealed underlying complexity fairly well, but it was still an anthropocentric approach. We were subjecting human views into this idea of IoT. So this ended up being an attempt at taking the philosophy head on, the Tower of Things, that is, and asking a question of how can I see through the eyes of my devices? What came out then was a deck of tarot cards as a playful way of predicting futures of devices. The cards are based off of standard Rider-Waite cards, just appropriated to fit better within IoT settings. It's comprised of 78 cards with the full arcana. You can see the major arcana right here. There are 22 major arcana cards. And there are 4 separate suits, 14 cards each. They've all been appropriated for what we understand divination for IoT could possibly be like. There are terms that are coming from computing technology, and there are these ideas around the ethics behind IoT as well. It could have just stopped there. It could have just been us having this set of cards and a kettle in front of us and going over divination sessions. But there was an important aspect of how would an IoT object interact with it? Where do we get the agency from this? And well, a tarot interaction is actually very simple. It's just a shuffle of cards. What's important is the person having their future fortune read do the shuffling, so a seer can then draw from that deck and interpret. So for that, the entire base platform was designed in Python. The idea was that any IoT-enabled object could be linked to it, and whatever interaction they did could churn out a forecast, essentially asking the object questions like, what does the future hold for you now that you've done this and done that, or how has this interaction affected you? How this is done is through juxtaposing keywords for each card. Tarot cards have deep meaning associations, with many cards having multiple meanings, which were translatable into objects. Of course, there were a few exceptions to make sense of the meaning association. I mean, I'd love to know what a tyrannical Roomba or vacuum cleaner would be like, but certain intellectual limitations meant the keywords had to be curated. And you can take this with a grain of salt, and you could say that, oh, we still subjected an anthropocentric perspective onto the IoT. That why can't there be a tyrannical Roomba? But that said, there wasn't an instance where an alternative keyword was not available. This was more for as a way of ease, if you could say, as a way to make it more easy to read in a way. In its current form, the platform is not linked to anything. It's more like a testbed. It randomly picks an object and assigns it to the user. I can actually show this to you as an example. This is the Tarot of Things. It's available online in its testing format. The link is in the paper, and it goes through lists of objects and assigns one to you. And as a participant, as a user, you're supposed to embody yourself and role play as this object. Once you hit reveal, it goes through the cards and presents 3 with their names and their meaning associations, and the orientation of the card gives a different association, as in this case. And these keywords are independent of themselves, but they're interdependent on each other to create the association of tarot, to create the prediction of tarot. So from a testing perspective, this was enough for us, but we wanted to take it ahead one step and understand exactly what can we do with this now. What can we imagine after this? And this came about in the form of design fiction, being speculative designers ourselves, as a fictional fortune teller called Madame Bitsy, who ran her fantastic future forecasting and fortune telling emporium for the Internet of Living Things. The name itself was intended to fuel this greater world building aspect of design fictions. And this essentially is it's an app that scans nearby devices and enters into, this is the important bit, private tarot reading sessions with them. Then, through machine learning and cloud services, it interprets their answers, their responses, in a manner that is legible to human cohabitors who can only experience that if the device gives consent. So this whole idea was then about provoking this post-anthropocentric perspective that we aren't alone in our smart homes. We have AI around us, and if the goal for AI is to mimic humans, then we have human-like things around us. Therefore, from a design perspective, perhaps the design of these objects could accommodate this nature of theirs. So moving back to the idea of the testing of the Tarot of Things, and we opted for the role playing for the participants, and they were supposed to embody the objects. There were certain complications, very obvious complications that came about. People just couldn't entirely fathom the idea of not being human, and the relations and answers they gave. The questions that we presented them were less about the objects and were more about this idea of an object person, or what if this mirror was a human? It was still an anthropocentric perspective, is what I'm saying. And this goes back to the philosophical contentions around object-oriented philosophy, which many philosophers have. As a human playing a non-human, how much of your humanness can you truly divorce from? It's this argument between object-orientedism and correlationism. I guess in the end, what I should point out is that this project was not intended to act as a statement against HCD in any way. It is a provocation of design orthodoxies with the intention of invoking an alternative perspective that could hold merit for where it may be applicable, perhaps in the crossover of knowledge between disciplines of design and philosophy, for instance. Or, if anything, it can attest to an argument for the use of carpentry in design practice. One thing is for sure, that the setting of tarot added this secondary layer of interpretation, a sort of self-assessment process for understanding what this post-anthropocentric perspective could be, and maybe it could open open more discussions into seeing things such as climate change and the effect of the environment, or social issues as objects as well, through this perspective, through this lens, and their effect and their impact on IoT or vice versa, I suppose. Um, thank you. There's some more reading and some more references if you'd like to know more about the project. You can go to Imagination Lancaster as well.